Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 10 of Walking Down the Warwick Road. As always, I'm Tim, joined by my co-host Pete. And Pete, a special one today, but before we get into the show, how are things with you? It's been a bit. It's been a while since we've been here, but how are things?
Yeah, it does seem a few weeks, but no, things are good. Things are good, Tim, in life in general. We don't usually discuss the present, and it's probably best that we don't at the moment because Manchester United are in a, to put it mildly, a very difficult position at the moment, I feel.
Yeah.
And it's not. We could do a whole show on that, but let's not.
Yeah, indeed. Well, as you said, we normally get to the present, but today we aren't going to do that. Yeah, so episode 10, we've been at this now for a year, Pete, and I think as people can see, we're supposed to be three of us today. We're a man late today. We were supposed to have Pete Chappell join us, but unfortunately he couldn't make it. But we want to thank him up front for his contributions and for the willingness initially to come on, obviously, and be a part of the show. But as we said this week, the show must go on, and what a show it is, Pete. When we put this podcast together, one of the things that we wanted to do or wanted to talk about was the fan culture and the culture around supporting United, the travel, the dress, the music. And today, I guess, we'll look at a bit of an iconic bit of football support in general, but United support in the football specials. We're going to get into it, obviously. We'll dive into the topic, but just off the top, you give us a sense of what the specials were and what they were all about.
Yeah, well, as you say, Tim, the deeper you drill into United's history, there's so many aspects. An integral part of United's history is the fan worship that's been phenomenal. Even back to the 30s, they avoided relegation to the third tier by beating Millwall in 1934. And 5,000 were there to welcome them back on the train that night. And all through the 40s, 50s, 60s, through that 20th century, United attracted a fanatical support. A kernel of that, if you will, a hub of that was United supporters going away on football special trains in the 60s, 70s and 80s.
Mm-hmm.
But there were nothing new to that era. As you can see, there's some early advertisements, flyers. Mm-hmm. The FA Cup final of 1924, I think it was. 1904. Advertising on the Great Northern Railway, a trip to London to see, in small letters, I think it says Manchester City versus Bolton Wanderers in the FA Cup final. And I can't see if it tells you how much that would have cost you, but it won't really matter. Then British Rail became nationalised after the war, advertising trips. There's some Arsenal fans travelling somewhere. Of course, they were. That was a still photograph. That's not how they used to travel on the specials. Although it did get hairy at some points, it never quite got that hairy.
Indeed.
Do you have any more, Tim?
Indeed, yeah, I do have some. I've some from the 70s and that era that we will get into for sure. Yeah, and so for me, because obviously I wasn't part of the era of the specials and be able to live through it, unfortunately. Although in reading about them and talking to you about them, I wish I had been, because they seem quite the adventure. Why is it important? Is in terms of fan culture? Why is it important that we're looking at the specials today, or what is it as part of the fan culture that it adds to that?
Hopefully, as we go through the program, I can just share some of the elements that made it so special. What it was train loads of supporters, 500 up to 500 or 600 on one train, following United from Manchester. It would be, with one stop maybe at Stockport, Stalybridge, and then onto the town we were playing in or the city we were playing in. And it was a full day out, no matter whether it was Stoke or it was Southampton. Obviously, some were longer than the other. But those trains carried the essence, if you will, of the Stretford end. the loyalty, the boisterousness, the vociferousness. And if you were part of it, it was just a tremendous adventure for you that took a whole day, you know. And usually we're from Piccadilly, Manchester, or Victoria Station, Manchester, whether we're going north or west. But as you saw there, it was nothing new. There was early trains before the war for football specials, as they were called. But then when you got a nationalised network after the war, which became British Railways, and more fans could afford to follow the team away, it became a big thing. Also, British Rail could connect, because they own the whole network. They could take you anywhere, any day. You didn't have to worry about a scheduled service. And of course, British Rail liked the fact that there were special trains, because it kept the more boisterous fans away from the more sedate travellers, if you will. So there were cheap one-day specials to whichever place United were playing. You probably started off as a young lad or a young girl, maybe going with a relative in a car or on a coach. But once you got your independence, somewhere between mid to late teens, you wanted to go and run with the pack. And the pack was the Stretford end. And at home, that was on the Stretford end itself. Although there's other pockets, of course, the scoreboard end had its more boisterous fans, etc. But you wanted to go with the masses, okay? And it was so the trains became very, very popular round about the early to mid 60s, and it would cost £2 to London, say, on the coach. Sorry, £2 on the coach, and only £2.50 on the special. So it was worth going on the special train. It's more direct, but it was also more of an adventure. In the beginning, they were put on for finals and semi-finals and internationals. But as I say, as the early 60s went on, younger fans started going in bigger numbers to away matches. It was part of the youth culture that was exploding in Britain after, probably after national service finished about 1950 to 1960. There was a lot of male youth that weren't called up for the army. So they had more time on their hands. Paul McCartney says the Beatles would never have happened if they'd been national service. If he'd had to serve, we wouldn't have met John Lennon and George Harrison. So there was more spare time for the youth. There was more money. They had more spare money. And probably because of what their parents and grandparents had been through in the early years of the 20th century, it was a bit more liberal, a bit more libertarian, because we'd been through 2 world wars. And I think the youth I grew up with had a bit more freedom than previous generations. So we wanted to put it to good use. And some people joined rock bands, and some people became football fans. Some did both. But going on the specials was a very cheap and convenient way of travelling. But the main thing was, every other weekend, it was a tremendous adventure. And for Man United fans, and Stretford ends in particular, it was an integral part of our fan culture.
Absolutely. And just want to remind people, make sure you get in the comments, interact with us, share your memories with us. We put out a tweet on Twitter not too long ago asking for your memories, and there were some great ones that came across. So if you're watching this, get your tweets into us, reply under this tweet, read them out. You can comment right on the video if you're watching on Twitter and on YouTube. Certainly get your memories in. And the 100% United podcast is in. Loving this, gents. Thanks, Tom. Tremendous message. Thank you very much. Hope you're enjoying it. Right, Pete. So you've talked a bit about sort of the evolution of the specials and what it means to the fan culture. So the trains went to, obviously, away matches, carrying United fans all over the country. We did our special on Tommy Dock, and we saw some clips. We'll see more moving pictures today, of course, of the specials, and but we saw sort of the explosion that you talked about in terms of people that were being, going across the country all of a sudden to away matches, thousands and thousands of supporters. So trains would take you there on a away day and then bring you back 60s, 70s, 80s. What was a typical day like on a special? What was a match day like traveling on a special to go away to watch United?
Well, it would invariably be on a Saturday. and they went to every away game. But league matches in the week they also went to, and cup matches particularly, they were great for getting back from, whereas service trains would not get you back at that time of night. But they would start quietly on a Saturday morning, and especially if you were going to, say, Southampton, Norwich, Ipswich, any of the London games from Manchester, 9 o'clock, I think they pulled out the first special. And there could be 3 of these specials, up to 3, maybe 4, with 500 on each. But yeah, it started slowly because it was early. You'd meet up with your friends, your mates. You'd try and get the type of seating you wanted, preferably a table, because that was easy to rest on, play cards on, and other pastimes and whatever. You'd board the train. It was old rolling stock. I started using them in 1971. So I'd progressed from the car and the coach with my dad and the coach with my mates, which was good fun, but it was just a bit tamer than going on the special. And the rolling stock was probably stuff that British Rail had used in the 50s. So very, loose tables, bulbs missing out of lights, blocked toilets sometimes, very primitive conditions. No real food bar. At the back, there was a carriage, and it was right at the back of the train. So if you sat near the front, you had a long way to go and get something. There were no hot drinks or hot food. So no tea or coffee. You could get orange juice, Mars bars, stuff like that. There was always cheese or ham rolls. But the trouble is they didn't last long. There wasn't enough to feed probably a fifth of the train. But very basic conditions. But at 17, when you want to run with the Stretford End pack, those things didn't matter. Police were on board, British Transport Police, but early doors it was all very relaxed, and early doors on the day it was very relaxed and quite light. And fans passed the time really on the outward journey, certainly for the first part of it. Well, quite a few were sleeping off the Friday night hangover. Friday night was a bit more of a going out night then, although perhaps that's me just getting old. But there's a lot of folk just used to roll up, still half cut from the night before. They'd sleep it off. They didn't want to chat. They didn't want to speculate on who'd be playing, what the lineup would be. They just slept it off. Others would play cards, read the papers, play shove-eightney. Again, we had 2 big pennies and a small penny, and you just knocked it from one end to the other, with goals at each end, very improvised. Now, I know this sounds like the Dark Ages, and I know that there are very few podcasts where somebody my age doesn't say, and of course there was no mobile phones in those days, but there wasn't, and there wasn't iPads or anything like that. There was nothing you could play games on. You could take a chess board. I think some people did, a mini chess board. But that wasn't very cool. That just wasn't very cool. So you just passed the time as you wanted, but usually it was chat about the previous match, what you'd done in the week, love life, work life, all aspects of life, and then chat about the match today. And as you got nearer, what you'd expect as you left the train and go into the station, because some grounds, say like Coventry, it was a bit of a doddle. But if you go to Newcastle, you were going to a war zone, so you had to prepare mentally for what might come along. So it was quiet, but the real thrill came when that special train would pull into the visiting town or city, especially if it was Newcastle, Merseyside, London. And before the train had pulled to a halt, everybody that could got their head out of a window, a door window or a carriage window, and were singing the United anthems before the train stopped. So, hello, hello, we are the Busby Boys, the Banana Split song, Manchester, la, 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 MUFC, all that stuff was coming out. They knew we'd arrived. Whoever was in the station or around it knew we'd arrived. And then as it was coming to a halt, but before it came to a halt, a few dozen used to deck off. The door would swing open, carriage door would swing open, and they'd jump off this moving train onto the platform. And that then just carried on with these 500 before the train stopped. As it stopped, boots, and it was mainly boots, just hit the platform ground, and you were off then. You were met by the police, the local police, and usually a lot of police horses and police dogs. And you set off then for your walk to the city centre. I think you've got a clip, haven't you, Tim? That I could say 1,000 words, but a picture's a better.
I do. Before we get to the clip, though, Pete, really quick, couple questions in for you.
Oh, right.
How reliable were the trains? Popcorn wants to know.
That's a good question, Popcorn or Poppycorn. Sorry, my apologies. They were reliable in that. For the 5 or 6 years I used them, they invariably got us to the visiting town. Occasionally, they could be running late, and that was a problem. One, because obviously you might miss kickoff, but I can't remember doing that. But in those days, of course, there were no tickets. Well, a few people get tickets for seating, but you stood on the terraces and you paid at the turnstile. So for Southampton, for example, the train got in about 2:00. You had to run to the ground before that bell went on the turnstile for a ground full size sign going up. So yeah, you did watch it carefully, but most of the time, although it wasn't great comfort you travelled in, they were reliable. They were very good British Rail in that respect.
Brilliant. Right, Pete, you mentioned about the clip. Let's take a look at the football specials.
With the introduction of the British Rail football specials, the number of travelling fans increased from just a handful to thousands every match day.
Cold. Normally they had no eating on them, no food or drink on them. You'd have in them days probably a 6-hour journey up to somewhere like Newcastle.
Right. Well, just a little clip for people to help visualize what it was like, what life was like on the football specials. A couple more comments in here from Poppycorn before we get to your reaction from the video, Pete. But love that clip. I think some queuing is outside Orient in the second division. And how much would a typical journey cost in today's money? Yeah, good question. But Pete, certainly, before we get to the cost and just answer the question, you watch the clip and you can just see as soon as the train, like you were talking about, as soon as you got to the destination, just a swell of people getting off these things. And it very much must have seemed like you were overtaking cities when you were traveling away. And I mean, we've talked about the crowds that United took away during that second division season, after allegation, and they're taking multiple thousands of people to places. They're taking 30,000 people away to some of these games. It must have been like you were overtaking a town by getting off the special and just rushing out of the station.
Exactly that, Tim. It was taking over the place. Not intentionally so much. Just it was to show your support for United. That you were very proud of. And of course, you'd look forward to this all week. I mean, you look forward to the week nowadays. Yeah, that's never changed. But you'd been thinking. But it was just more excitement around the match. It was a full day. And you were demonstrating your love for United, your loyalty for United, and going into the other town to do it. And as you say, as well as pay on the gates and no tickets, therefore there was no 2 or 3 or 4,000 allocation to away fans. United just turned up. And United supporters, certainly through the 60s and 70s and 80s, you knew when it could be a full house. So you'd go down on the Friday night. So when we played West Ham in '67 to win the league, and we actually beat them 6-1 to win the title, what a fantastic! I was only 12 then. I was listening to it on Grandstand, but I always wish I'd have been there. There was 10,000 in the streets of East London at 6 a.m. in the morning. Apparently, none of the locals had their milk that morning; it had all been stolen or drank by the hoods of Stretford Enders. So you went en masse. We really did. And Sheffield Wednesday would take 15,000, Blackpool 20,000, 10,000, to many, many games. If it was under 5,000, there was something amiss, like it was a very rainy Tuesday in Middlesbrough, something like that. Just to go back to Poppycoin's 2 points, well spotted. It was Orient, some of that clip.
Yeah.
The very first game in the second division. That whole new ball game to us. We'd gone down, put that behind us, got on and supported the team, and went to Orient, and it was like a home game. As were many away matches, they were like home games. The cost in today's terms, I don't know. Money doubles every 5 years, doesn't it? So somebody could do the maths in 1971, and it was £2.50. So there's a little exam question. I know that when I went to London last week there and back to the Spurs match recently, it cost me £94 on Avanti. So it was a lot more than £2.50.
And I'm sure you were traveling with a bit more luxury on that train than you
a lot more luxury. Still passionate fans, but a little bit more sedate. And it's funny, there is a generational thing. There always is in life. That you could see from the clip, very much the youth culture. It was 16 to 25-year-olds. And it was a little bit of there was a song by Sweet out at the time called Teenage Rampage. Turn another page on the Teenage Rampage. That summed up the specials coming off the train. You played Bowie's Rebel Rebel. That was out at the time. That sums it up. The Stones, Street Fighting Man. That was also there. What's very difficult, we've got to be careful here, Tim, I think, is it wasn't all about Trouble, but Trouble was alongside it. That was life in the 70s and 80s and the late 60s of football matches because of the numbers that travelled away following United and other clubs. But the big ones were Liverpool, Everton and United. The rival fans started to come and meet you at the station because that was their territory. It all became tribal and very territorial. And so there was some rampaging and there was some trouble and there was some bad incidents. But not all of the people on the special, most of them were kind of law-abiding. But when you get off the train, whether you were the guy or gal, and look at the number of girls that were in the clip as well, I don't think it gets mentioned enough because we always think of the lads, whatever age you are. United had a real hardcore of female supporters, and they weren't there just to look at Georgie Best or Jim Holton or Willie Morgan. Some were, but we all liked Georgie Best and Willie Morgan. They loved United. They followed United home and away. They hitchhiked to away games. They were as fanatical as the male counterparts. I should stress that.
And you were talking about the demographic, Pete, and basically younger people, right? I mean, we're talking about what's the age group that are on the specials, and we're talking late teens, early 20s. This was the mode of travel, right?
Yeah, for sure. I'd say 16 to 25. Yeah, and so some of those they were just coming into following United away, say in the 70s. The 25 to 30-year-olds had been through the 60s and followed Busby's lads as they became did so well. but mainly the numbers travelling on the trains was part of the youth explosion from about 63. Everton fans, Liverpool fans that travelled big on the trains. It was part of that explosion, and it's what started the singing on the terraces. It's a separate point. We could do a separate show about that. But
Yeah.
it was when fans started making their own songs up. Before that, in the East End, you always had I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles. They were all music hall songs, or Portsmouth, the Pompey Chimes, and the Scotswood Road at Newcastle.
Right.
They had club songs, Keep Right On to the End of the Road, Birmingham, but there were songs that had been passed down from the music halls. Then fans started making up their own songs like we've got today, and United have got one of the greatest songbooks in of all fans across the world, I believe. So yeah, it was a culture of young lads and lasses, and they were a bit, they wanted to run free. The lads and lasses of today, some still want to do that, but it is more a what's the word? It's a more passive society, I think, in a way, which is a good thing. There are still bad things happen, but you've not got the mass fans travelling like that and misbehaving, and you've not got, say, the strikes that we had, etc. It's a lot more. People abide a little bit more by the law or what they're told to do, and that's
Right.
probably a good thing. But I've got to say, having been part of running with that pack, it was great. It was fun, and no matter whether you were a troublemaker or a singer or a chess player or whatever, you ran with that pack because
Thrill
one
seekers.
was safety on the way to the ground and back. And you didn't have to get involved in trouble if you didn't want to. It was just great to sing the songs and let people know we're here. And then, of course, you had the match, Tim. You had the 90 minutes. And that was never dull because of the numbers in the ground. There was an edge because there was two tribes singing away.
Yep.
Even through the 70s, when we didn't have a team as good as maybe since in this century, it was still always exciting. Manchester United invariably went out to play attractive football, going forward with power and pace. And so it was good. It was good to watch, and it was great to support. And you felt you were really supporting your team. You were putting it was a show of strength, a show of faith. So, but we didn't win as many matches.
Well, you talked about some of the we looked at the demographic, but some of the people that were on the trains, and all from all walks of life, students, people that had maybe worked a 9 to 5 during the week, entertainers.
Yeah.
Can you just describe maybe some of the people that you met on the specials, and some of the other thrill seekers that you met?
Yeah, they were the thrill seekers. There was plenty of different characters in life, but also specific characters. They were the singers that wanted to sing from the minute they got on the train. They've probably been singing since they got out of bed that morning and hardly stopped. The fanatics that just had to be at the game, and that's all that mattered to them, following Manchester United away. The thrill seekers, those are the ones that might just get a bit bored and they'd pull the communication cord, especially on the way back, for fun. Now, that only meant that you stood on the tracks for about 20 minutes while the guards went outside and checked that there was nothing wrong, because they thought you're only supposed to pull that in emergency. People hanging out of carriage windows, hanging out of doors. Thrills that weren't for me. There was a craze in around 74, 75 of streaking. People used to run naked through crowded areas. So occasionally we had the odd streaker, and I remember one lad I remember his face vividly more than anything else, but he ran the whole length of the train on the way back from Birmingham, streaking naked, except for a scarf tied strategically. Well, I don't think I need to paint a picture, but that was the whole length of the train. It's a very narrow passageway through a train, and it was a very long train. There could be 14, 15 carriages. So you had the odd streaker. I'm going to say invariably male. It was never anything but male, sadly. as a young lad, you know. But you also had the anoraks, the nerds, and I tended to slip into a lot of these different categories. So you had the guys and gals that were analysing the previous results and what it meant if Charlton got a goal today, he'd break the record or whatever. You had the fighters, and they were talking a good fight before they got off the train. A lot more used to talk a good fight than actually got involved once she got off the train. There was fighters, stroke runners. There was gamblers, like a good card game. There's a few people you could sneak alcohol on. You wouldn't buy alcohol, but you could do it. And then there was the comedians that always wanted a joke. But there was the jibbers. I must mention the jibbers, Tim.
Yes,
for those that know, they know. But the jibbers, their motto in life is to pay is to fail. So they didn't want to reward British Rail with their £2.50. They took great delight in sneaking in the station some way onto the train, and then when the guard came round to clip your ticket, they would disappear, usually into the toilet, sometimes in the roof rack. This was for the slimmer supporter. They would get in on between the roof rack and the ceiling, and somebody put coats over them, the mates, and the guard would just go past them, not know whether they were there. Others tried hiding under the seats. The guards cottoned on to the ones that went to the toilet, so they knocked on the toilet door if it was engaged and waited till you showed your ticket. So the clever jibbers got really clever, and two lads went in with one ticket, and one put his ticket out the door for the thingy to clip, and the inspector thought, right, that's it, I've sorted him out, I'll move on. But the other guy who hadn't paid was behind him in the very tight toilet compartment. Anyway, they got away with it. Some would just be on the train, and then when the inspector came round, just front it up and say, sorry, I've come on without a ticket. So they used to have to take your name and address, and they send you a letter and ask for the money. So they just gave a false address. So those letters, Rail asking for £2.50 and maybe a small fine, just ended up in the return to sender. And there was various other methods, I'm sure, but the very clever jibbers just kept those methods to themselves.
Brilliant.
And maybe I would like to think their sons and grandsons are using those things now. They often got in free at the games, and sometimes you see that now still, trying to get in on one ticket, two of you in one turn of the turnstile. But
bit more difficult in this day and age.
Harder to do now. But the jibbers, long live the jibbers. So pay is to fail. And they used to call themselves, Tim, they were the ICJ.
The ICG, the Intercity Jibbers.
Intercity Jibbers, with a J.
Yeah.
Anyway, the Jibbers, God bless them. So then we get to the match. Then you're coming back. Now, coming back from the ground to the station was often a lot more.
I was going to ask you about that, Pete, because after a win, I'm imagine a result boisterous. Maybe boisterous still, or tired from the match, as well as the trip and things maybe petered out on the train. But it certainly after a loss, we try not to get too up and down with wins and losses. But was it more about the day out? Was it the fact that you were out with your mates and win, lose or draw? It's just a terrific day out, or what was the atmosphere like after the games?
It was as boisterous as it was on the way down there, and as boisterous as it was getting off the train and going in. But the heat was turned up a little bit for some.
Right.
If we lost, it invariably led to trouble. We weren't good losers as supporters. When I say we, I'm talking collectively now. Most people were, but it only took 50 in a mob of 500 or 600 or 2,000 to turn a peace-loving terrace or walk back to the station into a running fight with the police, or certainly a toing and froing with the away fans, the home fans trying to get at you, the police trying to separate them, and the elements of fighters that were in there wanted to fight. That made it tricky for everybody, because you couldn't just You couldn't have a pass that just said, "Sorry, I'm a gibber. I'm a chess player." You were in the mix, and you were being corralled to get you as quickly as possible. The police would like from that station to the train and on it and back home, and let the other tribe go back home for their tea. But sometimes the stations were quite a way away. You know, the trip, for example, say from Tottenham, and of course the trip back to the station might be in London. The 5 London grounds we invariably had was onto the underground, which was another maze of potential trouble. But the walk from Tottenham's ground to Seven Sisters was 30 minutes. And Tottenham fans knew it, and they knew all the side streets. And at about 4:30, because every match finished at 20-5, then the Tottenham fans would sing. They'd just sing to the Tipperary song. It's a long way to Tipperary. They just start singing and pointing. It's a long way to Seven Sisters. It's a long way, and we knew exactly what they meant. You had to have your wits about you to get down that Tottenham High Road back to the underground and avoid what was coming at you from the side streets. And it didn't matter whether you wanted trouble or not. You were in that Red Army, if you will.
Yeah.
It was often boisterous. You had to have your wits about you. You decided whether to keep your colours on or not. Usually you did, but at some grounds it just became too hard to do or too risky. So it was often where the trouble element came into it, Tim.
Yeah.
If we'd won, it might not be as bad. But usually it was about who we're playing, and win, draw or lose. It was always lively at Leeds, Newcastle, Stoke, Liverpool, Everton, West Ham, Chelsea, Tottenham. I'll come back to Millwall later because I've just got a little special thing about that. So it was often, quite boisterous, and it was a matter of getting back to the train safely. The police wanted us back to the station as quickly as possible, and then quelling the home fans, you know, and then you just sprawled out on the train and talked about the match or the events of the day that had happened. And that could keep you going for 4 to 5 hours. So that was kind of the footy over. But it wasn't always that the excitement was over. There was, I mentioned the food van earlier at the back of the train. And there was never enough of these ham rolls or whatever on the way there or on the way back. On the way back was more important because if you were a Stretford ender and you were on the football special, lunch was for wimps. So you just went all day. You might grab a pie or a hot dog, but on the way back, you were fairly hungry. So the lucky people in the first hour raided like locusts the mail carriage at the back, mail, MAIL, because it was just a carriage, where the bars and chocolate, the ham rolls were being served. But people were hungry. So invariably on a long trip back, that was worse. 5 hours, you know, back from Southampton. Can you imagine it? Or whatever. But there would always be some unplanned, unofficial stop on the way back. And that would be because we were running late or something, and we'd got behind the local train, and we had to wait that to clear down the line. So they pull into a station in the dead of night often. And but there was always a little refreshment bar on the station, tantalisingly within. You could eyeball it from the train. So most people didn't bother about that. There was always an announcement saying, please do not get off the train because it will be pulling out at any moment. Anyway, a few people decided that was too tantalising for them and would deck off and run to this little refreshment bar on the platform. And a few, 2 or 3, you'd get served. They'd grab a quick coffee or grab a quick pie or whatever. And then always this happened. You saw the train start moving. So the ones that we've got the food got quickly back on the train. But it triggered a mad dash for those that had food or didn't. Many made it back onto the train because the train was moving slowly and it was so long. And the mates were holding the doors open for them, you know, so they made it back. But there was always a couple of lads who hung on just a little too long in the food queue, Tim. And they were left chasing the train down the platform whilst it was moving. And what was funny, you shouldn't laugh, but what was funny was the expression on the face as it dawned on them that to actually run and jump on the train, they were going to have to chuck this pie or this cup of coffee away and just run and get on it. So some of them did, and they just threw it away and then ran for the train. They got on the train and started cursing. But there was often
Brilliant.
one lad in particular, not the same lad every time. And you've got to be careful what you say nowadays, but it's probably a bit more rotund than the rest of us. Just couldn't part with his pie and his hot coffee. And he ran with his pie and his hot coffee as his mates held the door open, but just couldn't make it onto the train. And as the train gathered speed and he was stood on the platform with his pie and his coffee, cursing, his mates are laughing at him, giving him the 2-finger salute. He was stuck there. He was stuck there. But the funniest of all, what was daft about it is you'd see him cursing and stood there forlorn in the middle of nowhere, wondering how he was going to get home to Manchester. And he was so annoyed with himself, he'd actually throw the pie on the ground. So there he was.
No pie.
No
drink.
Home, no pie.
No train.
No refreshment. He'd gone through all that and still didn't get back on the train. So that was probably, it didn't happen every trip, but it was something to look out for on the longer trips. And it just provided great entertainment. I often wonder how they got home.
Tremendous. That's what it's all about. Those are the stories that just make it, aren't they? Well, lightheartedness, certainly part of it, but you touched on it earlier with a little bit of the trouble and the trouble that sort of surrounded the trains in bringing this mass amount of people to these towns. We saw some of the vandalism on the trains, in the video on the specials, and oftentimes windows broken, some of the bathrooms smashed up. I read one car was burned out at one point. Usually, obviously, alcohol involved in a lot of what took place, I would imagine. But yeah, most of it seems harmless fun. But why is it in England that the specials notorious trouble?
It's a good question because it did happen. It was probably born out of boredom, and it was done by a small number of supporters, if you will. Funnily enough, it started as a craze started around 1963. Everton fans got on the front page of the Sunday papers after they'd more or less wrecked a train coming back from Chelsea, I think it was. They'd won the league that year, but they wrecked this train. Just vandalism, pure vandalism. There was nothing they could gain from it other than the thrill, I guess, they got through doing it. And fans wanted to show, or some of the fans were in the tribes, wanted to show they were lawless, reckless. I wouldn't necessarily prove you were a hard person if you were just to smash up something, an inanimate object, but it was in their psyche. So more police came on the trains as time went on. There was and of course, once Everton fans had done it, there was copycat stuff happening with United, Liverpool, etc. So it did happen, and pulling the cords, chucking stuff out the windows, a whole toilet pedestal sometimes. So they put more police on it. But it was born out of boredom on some of the longer trips. It wasn't widespread, but it got a lot of coverage in the papers for that next decade. Mm-hmm. But for that next decade, so say from 63, maybe for more than a decade, probably 2 decades, the whole thing of away fans travelling in those mass numbers and on trains specifically and landing on groups. You could control coaches arriving in cities a lot easier. You could park them right by the ground, but trains went into the city centres. Yep. Trains had 500 or 600 on, not 52. It was becoming a real problem for society. And really, it wouldn't be stopped on trains till the hooliganism was stopped in English football in generally. But that took another 16 or 17 years and disasters at Heysel and Hillsborough to make that change in society. As well as, and this is probably getting a bit too deep now, but as well as police getting better intelligence on what was happening, also CCTV cameras, the DNA, etc. But hooliganism was on the trains as it was part of English football from about 63, I'd say probably till 93. And then it kind of calmed down a bit. It still happens, of course it does, but not in the widespread, uncontrollable way it was happening on a lot of Saturday afternoons in the football season, and particularly where Manchester United fans were concerned. There were a couple of initiatives, Tim, two quick ones. One, the Football League tried to stop it and bought a train called the League Liner. And this was 1973, they spent £250,000 to buy this train. They ran it, they owned it, but they hired it out to one club a week, okay? And it was up to that club whether they wanted to run. They had to run it themselves if they wanted it. They kitted it out with, I'm sorry, it was £250,000. That doesn't sound much for a train. And I don't know what a train costs, but the record fee at the time in Britain was for a guy called David Nish, and that was £225,000. So if you take the dearest footballer in England today, or in Britain, that's what this train would have cost. Anyway, it worked quite well. It was a super train, they called it, and it had a disco on it, discotheque. That's what they were still called in those days, where you went to dance, discotheques. They had a disco on the train. It had a 4-screen, 42-seat cinema on it. It had 2 music carriages where you could use headphones to listen to your favourite artists. It all sounds very tame by 2021 standards, but in 1973, it was like life on Mars. You know, this was wow, this is amazing. So it's great for the nerds and the chess players, but it calmed down a few of the more boisterous types as well. And it was very good. The concept was, Tim, if you treated people like animals, they'd act like animals. And the football specials were a little bit like that. It was like transporting animals by carriage. But treat people properly and they'll respond with responsibility. And they did. There was no trouble on any of the league liners. I think Burnley used it first for a trip to QPR. And although they lost, there wasn't one incident, not one arrest. There was no police on those trains. That was revolutionary, really revolutionary for 1973, you know. The fans liked it because it was more relaxed and there's plenty to occupy them, you know. And United's turn came in March 73 for a trip to Tottenham. And I was lucky enough to go on that. It cost £3.50. It was £1 dearer than £2.50. That's a big percentage. Yeah. So anyways, whoever's worked out what it costs nowadays at £2.50 can work out what it costs at £3.50. But you had to have a full set of tokens as if you were getting a cup final ticket and you could go on this train. And we went on the train. Me, a lad called Dave Kirk, Jeff Malloy, Phil Lockett, and a few other lads that I went with. And it snaked out of Piccadilly, 14 carriages long, and a quarter of a mile in length. Quarter of a mile, this train. And it was the height of luxury compared to what we were used to. It was like travelling first class. It had music, films, as I say, etc. And the journey down was quiet and uneventful. And we got a valuable point at Tottenham. This was when we didn't go down, but we nearly went down, which is a very useful point. And that felt like a win. But you could get beer on it as well. They serve beer. Beer. No police. What wasn't it like? Anyway, we made our way down to the disco coach, okay? And I think you've got a picture of it there, have you, Tim?
I'm not sure if I have that one, Pete.
All right, don't worry. If you can imagine, it was just all the seats and everything taken out of a railway carriage and turned into a disco with graffiti on the walls. Right. And the disco was just some speakers and a little DJ's booth right in the corner. It was Tom Tyrrell from Piccadilly Radio. People might remember him. The Reds of an older vintage that might watch this will remember Tom Tyrrell. He was the DJ. And he played all the funky tunes. But we weren't funky. We were football fans, but we tried to dance a bit. But you know what it's like. Of course, the train's going along. The train was no different in that it was just on wheels and it went along the tracks at 100 miles an hour. So you can imagine what that's like today, trying to move your way down a train. So imagine a couple of beers, and I mean only a couple of beers, and the train's going at 100 miles an hour, and he's playing disco music, and you're trying to dance a bit. to these girls, in front of these girls who were on the train as well, and they were dancing a bit. But at best, you look drunk, and at worst, you just look crazy because you were all over the place. It took on. Nobody carried it on for very long. We just stood around the carriage, just propped ourselves up against the carriage wall, and tried to just stand there drinking our beer, tapping our foot to the music, and trying to look cool, Tim.
Brilliant.
And
I love it.
Very few of us succeeded.
We will. I'll track down the picture of the discos and we'll tweet it out from the from the Twitter page so people can have a look at it.
I'm actually on that picture, Tim.
Yes, that's the one that you were telling me about that you were on. Indeed, isn't it? Okay,
so Tim,
folks,
you had one job.
I know. I had one job, and I let you down. I let you down, unfortunately.
Don't worry.
But I will tweet. We will get the folks. We'll get the picture, and we'll tweet it out from the Twitter account so that you can all see a young Mr. Pete Molyneux in the disco having a go,
looking cool. But the best thing was just after we'd learned how to stand up and drink beer and look cool, Tommy Kavanagh were on the train and the players, and they all came down and mingled with us, signed autographs.
Oh, a nice one.
I would say you'd say nowadays and took pictures, but no one took a camera.
Yeah,
nobody took a
no
camera
smartphones.
Photograph.
Yeah,
that was on a par with taking your chest set and taking sandwiches. That was just for wimps. So luckily there was a Manchester Evening News photographer there, but he didn't get us with the players. But it was great to mix with the players. And the guys of that day, Jim Holton, Lou Macari, Jerry Daly, Sammy Mack, were great. They stayed with us for a while, and they really appreciated the support, especially because United were about 18th in the league then, But
that would have been the 72,
anyway,
70.
That was the football. That was the league liner, and it only lasted a couple of years. I think it just lost its way a bit, not literally, but it didn't get enough support. But you did have an initiative at Old Trafford shortly after that, where a guy called Dave Smith, who was chairman of the United Supporters Club and very active in trying to get United to away games by coach and train safely and without trouble. And he brought in a system, it's probably relevant to today, where you had to have a kind of passport to travel on the football special. Mm-hmm. So British Rail still ran them, Tim.
Yeah.
But you had to have joined the supporters club. You had a travel pass and a photograph on it, and they knew your home address, etc. And from 73 for the next 7 or 8 years, there was very little trouble on the trains themselves. It stopped most of the hooliganism and vandalism. And he made it, and he also made a point of filling up the food bar so it got you at least 3/4 of the way home. But he did a real good job, Dave Smith. He was chairman for quite a few years, and it was a very good initiative. As time went on, fans moved on to service trains.
Yeah.
And what's that Poppycorn says?
Yeah, he says, "Hi, Pete. Could listen to your tales all day. Echo those sentiments. But do you think away followings only increased due to cheaper travel? Did we have followings in the 40s and 50s too?" Well, we kind of talked about the affordability of the travel, but certainly, Pete, maybe you could speak to that as that's really what it was, wasn't it? The affordability and access to travel during that time with the specials. In terms that we should ask about the 40s and 50s is our friend of the show, Roy Kavanagh, MBE. We should ask him about the away support, but I'm sure you could speak a bit to that.
Yeah, I know from speaking to Roy personally. Funny enough, I was out for a couple of pints with him the other night. We've caught up. We've caught up since the pandemic here, but not for a few months. So we often he talks about his halcyon days, and I talk about mine. And usually they are when you're between 18 and 25, because everything happens to you for the first time then. So everybody's best times are that age in any era. Anyway, that's my opinion. Yes, that Roy went on the trains in the 60s. You can see adverts. There are adverts in the programs. If you picked up a program from the 1950s, 55 onwards, the United Review always carried an advert, say, travel by train to London, 57 shillings. 57 shillings. Royal explained that one. But
Amazing.
yeah, they ran all over the country. Ipswich in the 60s and the 50s. 40s, we had a picture. If Pete Chappell could have come on, he sent us a picture of his uncle's train ticket. This sounds a bit Anarakish, doesn't it? But I love it. From 1948 to go from Manchester to London for the FA Cup final against Blackpool. 1948. And the station that he boarded in Manchester wasn't Piccadilly. It was a place called Knott Mill. And that's now Deansgate Station. So that you're going back there. Well, let me do the maths. 52 years and 21, 73 years. So they were running cheap trips then, Poppycorn, but it's mainly for finals, semi-finals in the 40s, internationals. But in the 50s, when British Rail were getting their act together after being nationalised after the war, then, yeah, they ran through the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Now, what has changed, as well as society being a lot less hooliganised on the football front because of all the controls that were brought in with numbers that travel, you don't have British Rail now. You have the network owned by different companies. So that's fine if you want to go from Manchester to London, because Avanti will take you there and Eastern will take you all up the east side, and you could change and go from the northwest to the northeast. But the British Rail could just take you anywhere. So we played in the Cup in 79 at Colchester, and they took 3 specials right straight to Colchester, I think via London. But you couldn't. To do that now, you'd have to change trains at least once. So they could take you anywhere and into the dead of night. So when I was coming back from Tottenham the other week, the last train back I could get was 9:20 to actually get some transport when I got into Manchester. Colchester, we arrived back in Manchester about 3 a.m. So you still had to find your way home. But the train got you all the way back then from a night match that ended at 10 o'clock at night. You can't do it now because the network's been broken up. So that stopped a lot of the mass train travel. Also, people in the younger end could afford cars. Cars took over it. You started to go with your mates.
Having some technical difficulties here, I think.
Oh, in the 90s and the 2000s, so on, a lot of lads and lasses travel by car now because they've got cars.
Yeah.
So society changes and the mode of transport and what fans do change. But there was an explosion of use in the 60s, Tim.
Yeah, that sort of leads us into the last little bit. Is obviously the specials are now extinct. Was that just due to the advent of? I mean, some of the things that you touched on, sort of leading up to the show, were, the fact that there's now allotments for away supporters. There's other modes of travel certainly that have come along since those days. But when did the specials become extinct, and what led to that, Pete?
That's a good question. I mean, I moved in my metamorphosis or evolvement, Darwin would have said. After I'd gone car, coach, trains, we moved into hiring vans, because then you go from A to B and do what you want, stop where you want, etc. That's for another show, maybe. And then onto cars in the 90s. So certainly there were lads and lasses that came on and responded to the advert we put out for this show, Tim, and shared some tales of breaking down, going to Arsenal and having to walk over live lines near Euston in the 80s. It got very sly in the 80s, there's no doubt about it, that the rivalry did, because it wasn't just meeting a train load coming off. They were ambushing people on the way to the ground, away from the police, etc. And the use of weapons became a lot more prevalent. So it got really nasty in the 80s, and I think that probably deterred some from travelling on the trains. But I think I still went on some of the specials in late 80s, but I think 90s probably saw the end of it. Hillsborough changed Hillsborough over here changed so much about the culture of fans, where they could stand or sit, how they travelled, what numbers they travelled in. and just tightening up of behaviour around fans with police intelligence. It changed things. I've got to say, for the better. But when you change something for the better, you often take some of the fun element out as well. But
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just glad that I was part of it, you know, and stayed unscathed. Except I'll just tell you about Millwall very quickly.
Please do.
You could just book on the day for a train. Some risk that I'd get mine during the week, but we didn't for Millwall because we knew there'd be spaces. Now Millwall is 1974 in the second division. We haven't played them since 1934. And they had this reputation all through the 60s, all sorts of reputation. Dockland area, hard men, hard people. They'd had the ground shut for crowd trouble in the 60s before it all started. So we thought, no worries, Doc's Red Army will be fine. There was a headline. They used to bring the London papers up to Manchester for you to read them as you got on the train. And it said, 10,000 Doc's Red Army on the march to London. We thought, great. We went and bought the ticket, and it was ticket number 51 and 52. I'll always remember it. Me and Jeff Malloy. Ticket 51, ticket 52. So we said to the guy, oh, God, how many specials are they running? Because usually your ticket was number 200, something, 300, right. 400, 500, 52. I said, are we on the second or third special? He says, you're on the only special, son. I said, well, that can't be right. He says, no, we've sold 157 tickets in total. Some at Stockport, some here. That's 52nd one here. So we thought, oh, right, that's right. And we got on the train, couldn't really fathom it out. But it was 10 minutes down the line to Stockport where other fans could get on, and other fans did get on. But there was a lot of those that were on the train that in Manchester got off at Stockport and thought, I'm not risking this. And we didn't go to Millwall. And so in the end, there was about 100 on that train. And those that got off at Stockport knew something we didn't, because it's the most horrendous football trip I've ever had in my time in terms of being frightened and scared, and reputations coming to roost. Not just being rumours. But again, maybe for another show. I survived it. We won 1-0 with a Jenny Daly penalty. But I've never been so silent at a football match, and I've never known a United goal celebrated with so few cheers at an away match. So the football special work was great in most cases for running with the pack, but not on a trip to Millwall.
Terrific story, Pete. We'll finish off popcorn and just Googled it. A pound in 1971 is worth $12.58 in today's money, so $2.50, so 37 pound in today's money, Pete. There we go.
Great value today or in 1971. Great value.
Thank you for all the contributions there, Poppycorn. Right. Well, Pete, that hour has absolutely flown by. Thank you so much for sharing all your memories of the specials with us, and the first part of what we hope is many more episodes in terms of United fan culture, and talking about all the great things that surround the culture of supporting United. If you want to watch this episode, folks, you can watch it at if you go to our Twitter page, it'll be pinned to the pinned tweet there. You can watch it on YouTube. Also in the description on our Twitter page, you can watch this episode as well as all the other episodes we've done. We've done 10 of them so far. You can find those at WTWR_episodes. All the episodes are there. But if you go to at Warwick Road Walk, which is where we, converse with everyone and where we sort of put out our tweets from, in the description on that Twitter page, you'll find a link to all of the episodes that we've done in the past. Pete, final word. Just give us a few final words before we go on the specials and sort of what they meant to you and your memories and the impacts. Again, just sum it up really quickly. The impact on United's fan culture.
For a young fella from about 16 or 17 onwards till I got to my mid-20s, those away days provided adventures I couldn't get anywhere else, not just going to them, but the excitement levels that they gave me, watching my team, going with fans, the sing songs, the journey, the crack, everything of being part of a group or I don't like to use the word gang, but it was a gang, but just a great set of supporters. And you never knew what was going to happen from one away match to another. No two were ever the same. They were just great, great adventures. And I remember them fondly. I covered them in a book I did called Sir Ralph Fergie. For anybody that's not listened to enough already, he could read that. Just covering some of those journeys and the things that happened that were funny, amusing, entertaining. I'm just glad that I had that time. I'd have it over again, but you can't be greedy. They were just a great part of my youth, and I treasure them.
Terrific stuff. Right, folks. We'll see you soon for episode 11. Give us a follow on Twitter, and you can keep up to date with everything that we have coming up. Again, Pete, it's been a pleasure, and we'll see everybody soon.
Yeah, take care, folks. See you again.